Hello, good morning from Knockbreda. Our proverb for today is Proverbs 11 and verse 1. Proverbs 11 and verse 1. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favour with him. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favour with him. And obviously this proverb is talking about the Lord, his characteristics, his personality, his honesty, his justice, and it does that by describing him as a kind of a merchant who uses honest scales. He's not cheating anyone, he's not out to cheat anyone, but this merchant wants to be upfront with people and honest, and he uses the correct weights and measures. In other words, you can always trust the Lord to do what is right. You can always trust the Lord to be fair and upright. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favour with him. It also picks up on one of the commandments. So commandment number 8, you shall not steal, would resonate with this particular proverb, wouldn't it? The Lord is honest. There's no stealing, no theft in him, and he expects the same from his people. There's to be no dishonesty, there's to be no stealing. So that 8th commandment ties in with Proverbs 11 and verse 1 quite well. Also then in the New Testament, it's great to be able to look at the New Testament and see how it impacts and interprets some of the Old Testament. And we see the same kind of honesty running all the way through from the Old Testament into the New Testament. So for example, I could pick many verses, but I'm just going to read one from Romans chapter 13 and verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Well, it's talking there about our debts and how we should be paying our debts, not keeping what doesn't belong to us, in other words. And again, I think that just ties in with the proverb, because the merchant is not to cheat anyone, he's to be totally upfront and honest. And in the same way, the New Testament, Paul says that we're not to have any debts, we're to be upfront with people, honest, pay them back what we owe, be honest with our money and in our dealings. The only debt that we're to have is the debt of love. So we're to love one another. We're to show love within the church, we're to show love to other people outside the church. And in that sense, we feel that we have a debt to owe people. We have a debt to give to people, and that debt is to love them. And that comes because God has loved us, and Jesus has loved us and demonstrated his love to us. So be honest, no theft amongst Christian people, no stealing, no debts to be left unpaid. And one final story that resonates with me on this theme is from Luke chapter 19, where we meet the character of Zacchaeus. And Jesus meets Zacchaeus, famously the short man who had to climb up the tree in Jericho to see the Lord as he came into town. And he was known as a cheat. He was known as a tax collector who creamed off money for himself, kept some of it for himself. And that's why nobody liked him. Nobody liked tax collectors in general in those days, but certainly no one liked Zacchaeus because of that. And yet Jesus comes into his life and Jesus changes him. And if you remember the story, he calls Zacchaeus down from the tree and says, I must go to your house today. And we find that Jesus just changes everything. And that Zacchaeus is willing, having come to Christ, to pay back the debts that he owes, to give back to the people the money that he's cheated them of. So he's able to put into practice that 8th commandment. And he knows that his life has just been changed because Jesus has come into it. And that's what happens when someone becomes a Christian, that their whole life does change. Everything about us changes. And although we're never perfect, of course not, far from it, we're aiming to be more like Jesus, more honest, more upfront and open in our dealings, never stealing or taking things that don't belong to us. So all that, I think, may be coming from Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favour with him.